The elevator doors had barely closed before Nikolai Bresch said it. "You look different tonight." Thea Calloway did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the brass panel, on the ascending numbers, on anything except the reflection of the man standing 3 feet behind her in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She had worked for him for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew when his voice carried a question inside a statement. "I changed after the Meridian pitch," she said. "I didn't have time to go home first, I noticed." The elevator reached the 43rd floor and opened onto the private dining corridor of the Aurelian Hotel. Nikolai stepped out first. That was always how it went. He moved, and rooms rearranged themselves around him. Thea followed, her midnight blue wrap dress brushing her calves, her portfolio tucked under one arm like a shield. She was the head of data operations for Bresch Capital. She had built their entire risk modeling system from a framework she'd developed herself in graduate school, then quietly retrofitted it to work across 6 asset classes and 3 international markets. Her annual performance review had called her work quietly indispensable. She had underlined the word quietly with a pen and then crossed it out. She was also, by any standard the fashion industry cared about, a large woman. She knew it the way she knew the weather. Not as a crisis, just as a fact of the atmosphere. The wrap dress was new. She had bought it on impulse during her lunch break, still buzzing from the Meridian people's reaction when she'd walked them through the 3rd quarter projections. The fabric was good. It moved the way she moved. Apparently, Nikolai Bresch had noticed. The dinner was a client event, a quiet cultivation evening for the Harmon family office, whose patriarch, Clarence Harmon, had been circling Bresch Capital for 8 months without committing. Nikolai needed him in the room and smiling. Thea had been invited because she could speak Clarence Harmon's language. Cautious, number first, show me the model. What she had not been invited to do was walk into that room ahead of Nikolai and have Clarence Harmon stand up from the table. "Messieurs Calloway." Harmon extended a hand. He was 72, silver-haired, and had the careful posture of a man who had spent decades being underestimated and had learned to enjoy it. "I was hoping you'd be here. I have 3 follow-up questions from your quarterly analysis that my own team couldn't answer." Thea shook his hand. "I brought updated figures." She felt Nikolai go still beside her. The dinner moved through its courses. Thea answered Harmon's questions. She redirected twice when one of Harmon's associates tried to challenge her numbers. Gently the first time, with the specific data point he'd misread, and then less gently the second time when he tried again with the same error dressed in different language. By the dessert course, Harmon's associate had stopped talking, and Harmon himself was leaning forward slightly in his chair, the way people do when they have already made a decision and are just watching to see if anyone will give them a reason to change it. Nobody did. After Harmon excused himself and his team for the evening, shaking hands with Nikolai and then with Thea, in that order, with equal weight, the corridor went quiet. Nikolai poured 2 fingers of scotch from the service cart that had been left near the window. He did not offer Thea a glass. That wasn't rudeness. He simply forgot, sometimes, that other people also had physical needs. She poured her own. "Who told Harmon to ask for you specifically?" Nikolai said. "Nobody." She set the decanter down. "He read my quarterly note. The one attached to the fund summary you send clients. That note has your name on it." "It's always had my name on it." He looked at her then, with that particular expression she had learned to read, not quite surprise, more like recalibration. Nikolai Bresch had built a reputation on reading rooms, reading numbers, reading people. He was, Thea had concluded, slightly slower at reading the people who worked closest to him, because proximity created a kind of blind spot he had never fully acknowledged. "You should have been at the Meridian dinner in March," he said. "Vasquez from their board asked 3 questions I couldn't fully answer." "I know," Thea said. "I heard. From who?" "From Vasquez. He emailed me afterward. I sent him a supplemental memo." The scotch glass paused halfway to Nikolai's mouth. "You've been corresponding with Vasquez. He had questions. I answered them. They signed the term sheet 2 weeks later. She kept her voice even. This was not the conversation she had expected to be having at 10:43 on a Thursday evening, but she had learned that important conversations with Nikolai happened sideways, arriving at angles she couldn't always predict. "Is that a problem?" He set the glass down. "No." "Good, Thea." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, which was unusual. She had catalogued most of his expressions over 2 years. This one sat at the edge of the familiar without quite landing in it. "The dress," he said, and then he stopped, which was also unusual. She waited. "Were you meeting someone before this?" There it was, not where she'd expected it, but there. She recognized it not because she'd been looking for it, but because she'd had 2 years to learn the specific texture-exercising discipline over a feeling he hadn't yet named. "No," she said. He nodded once, very slightly, and picked up his scotch. She went home that night and stood in her kitchen in the dark and thought about what she had just understood. The next morning, the office was its usual controlled chaos. Thea arrived at 7:15, which was her normal time, unlocked the data suite, and started running the overnight portfolio reconciliations. She did not think about the dinner. She thought about the Harmon commitment, which came of a signed letter of intent, and about the 3 model adjustments she needed to make before the weekly risk review. At 11, her phone buzzed. "Nikolai, my office." She saved her file and went. He was standing at the window when she came in, which meant he was thinking about something he hadn't resolved. He stood at windows when he was working a problem. "Close the door," he said. She did. Voss Financial sent a representative to the Meridian closing dinner. He turned. "Declan Voss's firm. You know who they are." She knew. Everyone in the mid-Atlantic asset management world knew. Voss Financial had spent 3 years trying to poach Bresh Capital's institutional clients, not with better returns, but with better access, political connections, event invitations, the kind of soft infrastructure that certain clients valued more than basis points. They had not succeeded significantly, but they had not stopped trying. "His representative's name is Sawyer Pruitt," Nikolai said. "He's been contacting 3 of our top-tier clients in the past 6 weeks. I found out this morning how. Because Clarence Harmon told me, as a courtesy before he signed this morning. He said a man from Voss reached out to him last month and mentioned your name." The room was quiet enough that Thea could hear the air system. "Mentioned my name how?" she said carefully. "Implied you'd been in contact with Voss, that you might be exploring a transition." Nikolai's voice was absolutely controlled, which was the version of him she'd learned to be most attentive to. "Harmon didn't believe it, which is why he told me and still signed, but I need to know whether there's any version of that story that's true." Thea thought about the 3 possible responses available to her: offense, clarification, or simple fact. She chose fact. "No," she said. "I have never been contacted by Voss Financial. I have no why my name is in that Sawyer Pruitt, but it's not because I put it there." He watched her for a long moment. She watched him back. "All right," he said. "Is that all?" "No." He moved to his desk, picked up a folder, handed it to her. "Voss has been attempting to replicate our Canadian corridor model. They haven't gotten there, but they're close. Someone gave them the architecture. Not the full model. They don't have the calibration layer, but the structural framework." Thea opened the folder. She looked at the pages inside. She closed it. "That framework is mine," she said. "I built it. It's not published anywhere. It exists in 3 places. My own files, the secure server, and the version embedded in the fund documentation, which means whoever gave it to them had access to one of those 3 places." "Yes." She looked at him. "You've already ruled out the fund documentation. That version is abstracted enough that you couldn't reverse engineer the framework from it." "Yes." "So it's either my files or the secure server." "Yes." He sat down. This was also information. Nikolai sat when he was tired of standing on the outside of a problem and had decided to go through it. "I don't think it's you." "I know you don't," she said, "because if you thought it was me, I wouldn't be standing in this office. I'd be standing in front of your legal team. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The version of a smile he produced when someone said something he hadn't expected. I need you to find out how they got it, he said. You want me to trace it myself. You want me to trace it myself. You built the architecture. You'd know better than anyone where a copy could have been pulled from without triggering the access logs. She thought about it. She thought about the secondary logging systems she had put in place 18 months ago, quietly. Because she had always believed in redundancy, and because the primary logs had a 15-minute gap on the hour rotation. The secondary logs nobody knew about, because she had never mentioned them. I'll need 3 days, she said, and I'll need you to keep Sawyer Pruitt from making any more contact with our client list until I know what I'm looking at. That I can do. She was at the door when he said her name again. She turned. The dress last night, he said. It was for you, not for anyone else. He paused. I shouldn't have implied otherwise. Thea stood in the doorway of Nikolai Bresch's office, holding a folder of evidence of corporate espionage at 11:23 on a Friday morning, and understood that he had just told her something that had taken him considerably longer to say than it should have. I know, she said, and left. The 3 days became 2. The secondary logs were clean, precise, and devastating. Thea sat in the data suite at midnight on the second day and looked at the access record, and it was not a mystery once she looked at it correctly. It had the shape of something patient and deliberate, someone who understood system architecture well enough to move through it carefully, but not well enough to know about the layer underneath. Nathan Ryle, Senior Systems Analyst, 4 years with the firm, access credentials that should not have reached the folder in question but did, because 8 months ago there had been a permissions migration during a server upgrade and a single misclassified directory had been caught in the drag. A mistake, technically, but Nathan Ryle had found that mistake and used it systematically over 6 weeks before the permissions were corrected in the next maintenance cycle. She documented everything. She compiled it into a clean report with timestamps, access IDs, the specific files, the sequence. She did not add editorializing. The facts were sufficient. She sent it to Nikolai at 12:47 a.m. with one line. It was a permissions error that became an opportunity. Everything you need is here. His response came at 1:15. Come to the office tomorrow at 8. Not a request. She closed her laptop and, for the first time in 2 days, made herself a cup of tea. The morning meeting was not only Nikolai. When Thea arrived at 8, there were 2 men from the firm's legal team already seated in the conference room, and Nikolai was standing at the window again. He turned when she came in. Walk them through it, he said. She walked them through it. She was precise, unhurried, and thorough. The legal team asked good questions. She answered them. After 40 minutes, the lead attorney, a compact and serious woman named Renata Cross, who Thea had seen in the building before but never spoken to, said, "Thank you," Thea said. "You said you installed the secondary logging protocol 18 months ago." "Yes. Did you document that installation?" "Yes. It's in the server maintenance records. It's not hidden. It just never came up in a review because it's never been needed before." Cross looked at Nikolai. Something passed between them. "We'll take it from here," Cross said. After the legal team left, the conference room was quiet. Thea began gathering her materials. "Nathan Ryle has been with the firm for 4 years, Nikolai said. "I know. He runs the department picnic every July. I know that too." She looked up. "Does that change the evidence?" "No," he exhaled, slowly. "No, it doesn't. The framework he accessed. I can rebuild the calibration layer with a different architecture. Whatever Voss has will be outdated within a quarter. I know. That's not." He stopped. He moved away from the window, the first time she'd ever seen him step away from it mid-thought. He came to stand at the end of the table, close enough that she could see the slight tension along his jaw. "You installed that logging system 18 months ago, without being asked. Yes? Because you thought something like this might happen? Because I thought redundancy was good practice." "Thea, His voice dropped. Not softer, exactly. More concentrated. Stop giving me the professional answer. She set down her portfolio. She looked at him directly, the way she had learned to look at him in rooms like this, where the actual conversation was always slightly offset from the one they appeared to be having. I installed it, she said carefully, because I noticed that the primary logging system had a gap on the hour rotation, and I don't like gaps. And because I have spent 2 years building something here that I don't want to lose to carelessness. Mine or anyone else's. Something here, he said. The work. Yes, only the work. The question landed with exactly the weight he had intended it to carry, which was considerable. Thea had not survived 2 years in a firm like this by misreading weight. Nikolai, she said. Yes. You asked me last night, the night of the Harmon dinner, if I was meeting someone I remember, and the night before the Meridian pitch, when I stayed late, you came back to the office at 9 p.m. and found me there. You said you'd forgotten something. You hadn't forgotten anything. Your desk was exactly as you'd left it. A beat, and the quarterly note, she continued. The one Harmon read. You approved that note before it went out. You read every word. You knew my name was on it. He said nothing. So, Thea said, I've answered your question. You already know I'm not going anywhere. You have known it for some time. The thing you haven't done is say the thing you've been not saying in various hotel corridors and late offices and conference rooms for approximately 14 months. The silence was the particular kind that happens when something has been building long enough that the moment of its arrival is almost quiet. 14 months, he said. I counted back to the Caldwell Review in November of last year. You offered me a car home in a rainstorm, and then drove with me instead of getting out at your building. That was the first time. Nikolai Bresch, who had sat across from heads of state and hostile shareholders and a federal inquiry, and had never, to anyone's observation, seemed particularly unsettled, looked at her for a long moment with something unguarded in his face. I'm not good at this, he said. I know, she said. I've been watching you be not good at it for over a year. That doesn't bother you. A lot of things bother me. That's not one of them. He moved then, deliberate and unhurried, around the end of the conference table, and stopped in front of her in a way that left the distance between them as a question she could answer however she chose. She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the fatigue around his eyes from the past 2 days, and something underneath the fatigue that had been there much longer. Dinner, he said. Not a client event, not a working dinner. You and me, and I will make a reservation somewhere that is not the Aurelian Hotel. Thursday, she said. I have the Mercer Review Wednesday, and I won't be good company before it's done. Thursday, he agreed. He looked at her the way she had looked at her data on the second night, with the particular attention of someone who has found the thing they were looking for and is only now understanding how long the search took. Thea. Yes, the dress. Both nights he stopped. Every time. She picked up her portfolio. She allowed herself briefly to smile. I know, she said. I wore it for me. But I didn't mind that you noticed. The news about Nathan Ryle moved through the firm's upper floor over the following week in that particular way of internal events that are acknowledged without being discussed. He was gone by Wednesday. Renata Cross's team filed with the SEC on Friday. Voss Financial received a cease and desist by the end of the month, and their Meridian approach collapsed quietly, as overextended strategies tend to do when the structural premise turns out to be borrowed. Thea rebuilt the Canadian corridor model in 11 days. The new calibration layer was more elegant than the original, because she had the advantage of knowing exactly where the old one had been vulnerable. She did not mention this to anyone. The work was its own record. The Thursday dinner happened, and then another one the following week, and then it stopped being an event that required planning because it became simply part of how their weeks were structured. Nikolai was not, as he had acknowledged, particularly good at the softer mechanics of being close to someone. He was good at attention and consistency, and showing up in rooms where he had said he would be. He was also, she discovered, the kind of man who remembered things she mentioned once and never needed to mention again, which was its own particular language. She was the kind of woman who had always trusted data over narrative, which meant she trusted what she could observe over time more than what was said in a single moment. What she observed over months was consistent. There was a morning in March when Clarence Harmon held a small appreciation event for his advisory team and invited the Bresch Capital partners. Nikolai arrived with Thea. Harmon shook her hand first, then Nikolai's, and said to Nikolai, "You're lucky, you know. Most people don't have someone in their corner who builds better from scratch than anyone else builds from a template." Nikolai looked at Thea. He had that expression again, the one she'd catalogued that night in the Aurelian corridor, the one that sat at the edge of familiar without quite landing in it. Except now she recognized it, because she had seen it enough times to know its name. "I know," he said. "I knew it before I knew what to do with it." Harmon laughed, entirely pleased with this answer, and moved on to greet the next arrival. Thea stood beside Nikolai, in a cream and charcoal blazer she had bought with the same impulse as the blue dress, and felt the specific warmth of being in a room where no part of her was invisible. She had not arrived there by being smaller. She had arrived there by being exactly what she was: thorough, patient, quietly extraordinary, and unwilling to wait too slowly to see heard. She had built the Arca speaker. She had built the architecture. She had always known where the gaps were. She had just been waiting for the right moment to show what she'd put there.